Hello, everybody. I'm Toby Schifsky. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate Education at Dearborn and Kaplan. And today we have a pretty timely, market-sensitive topic that we're going to try to cover. There's a lot of information to get through, and I'll tell you right from off the bat, I have broken every rule of PowerPoint slide presentation because I think there's important information in here you might want to read, and I'll talk about it, and we can discuss it a little bit. But there's a lot to get through. And the topic is really the impact of the recent buyer agency rulings. We're really talking about the giant class action lawsuits that have gone against NAR, National Association of Realtors, and large brokerages, large national brokerages, and then all the copycat class action lawsuits that have piled on top. And if you work through the muck and mire and you try to figure out what does it really mean to the industry, I can tell you that, in my opinion, there is a sea change happening within the industry. And I've seen two or three of these in my real estate career since 1991. And we're going to talk about what that means. And the good news I can tell you is there's nothing in here that's not insurmountable, but it will be fraught with some challenges. There will be people who will change their business and thrive, and there will be people who don't change their business and don't thrive on the real estate transaction side of the business. For educators, there could be opportunity for educators also, and we're going to talk about that at the end of this. So once again, we got about 30 minutes. We got a lot to get through. If you have any questions, I know Chris Robinson's going to be on here as a national account director for us. He'll be moderating. There's a couple other team members from Dearborn. Go ahead and ask your questions in the chat. I'll try to answer them as we play along. But first and foremost, what I'd like to do, I'm going to do a quick poll question. I want to see who's on with us because we get all different types of people. And the quick poll question is, and go ahead, answer it on your screen here. What is your current role at your real estate school? Are you the owner operator? Are you an administrator? Are you an instructor? Hey, how about this? I'm not even currently a school yet, but I'm really thinking hard about it. And I'm here about Dearborn, and I want to see what you have to offer as a partner. Go ahead and answer. These are all anonymous. Nobody sees what you answered. We just get an indication of who's on so that we can kind of tailor the conversation. And this is good. I can tell you right now, we're sitting at about 37 or 38% of you are owner operators, 21% are administrators, instructors. Gosh, we got a lot of instructors. This is great. We got about 56% of you are instructors. And there are people on here who don't even have a school yet. Good for you guys. All right, I'm going to always share the results of the poll. So go ahead and take a look. There's the results. We finished with owner operators. Good for you guys. Because this is going to be a change. And here's the deal. We've seen over time this reporting in news and talking about this change, this change in agency and how people are paid and how buyers, agents are probably going to have to create a whole new value proposition and a whole new way of doing business in order to assure they get paid. There's a lot of talk. In fact, early on in this class action lawsuit stuff, I saw reports that some organizations were thinking that as many as 80% of the licensee population, 80% will fall out of the business. Now, I think that's ridiculous. That's not going to happen, right? Even during the big, mortgage crisis and financial meltdown of 2007, 8, 9, 10, right? I mean, we saw about a 30% drop in total licensees max, and then it's recovered and then some since then. So, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to be challenged. We are going to have challenges. And some people, just like back during the mortgage crisis in 2007, 8, right? People who learned how to change their business and do short sales, foreclosures, and REOs, they did a bang-up business. And the people that didn't do that, for the most part, they were out of the business rather quickly because you had to go where the business is. And what I can tell you is there is one of these kind of changes coming for the buyer side of the transaction. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing this poll, and let's jump in to these slides. So once again, take a look at this slide. Do not build your slides like this ever. But take a look at this and take a quick read. I know you can all see it, but in the past, just a little history lesson, up until the early 1990s, I can tell you, I was in real estate in 1991, and it was like 1991, 1992, there was a lawsuit originated in Minnesota. The real estate company I didn't work for, was a competitor at the time, lost a lawsuit. And it was about dual agency, and it was about disclosure, and it was about who's representing who. And it was this big thing where everybody stood around and scratched their heads and said, oh my gosh, they just got sued for that and they lost. And we do the same thing at our brokerage. Well, it changed a lot of things in the industry, right? And so, but up until that point, if you guys have been in the business long enough, yeah, look at this. Look at Lynn. Lynn, been in the business since 78. Then you've seen it all, right? It was normal for the buyer to pay the commission. It was normal for the buyer to pay the commission. No, the seller to pay the commission, I think is what you're saying. Oh, the buyer, yes. So somehow the buyer had to make sure that you got paid. Yeah, I can see that too, Lynn. But the idea is this: the back then, the seller would pay the commission under a thing called sub-agency, right? Agents owed their fiduciary duties to the sellers and were legally obligated to negotiate the best terms and the price for them, for the seller. Even though I was representing my my brother in a deal, I'd have to represent the seller under this thing called sub-agency, which meant if I'm getting paid a commission, I have to represent the party who's paying the commission. That was sub-agency, essentially, right? Agents from non-listing firms work with the buyers, but as a sub-agent for the seller. There was big problems with all this because I could be working for a seller representing my buyer, and the seller has no idea what I'm talking about. There's no idea what I'm saying to the buyer, but somehow I'm representing them. And that seller could become liable, right? Through vicarious liability for the comments I was making. It was fraught with danger. So here's a funny little twist. The Department of Justice actually weighed in on this and said, you need to separate this somehow. You need to identify who's representing who, right? The buyers have to have their representatives. Sellers have to have, people have to know who you're representing. Kind of changed the industry, which is funny because some argue it actually led to where we are today with our representation, right? So, and then back then, the compensation field in the MLS only offered unilateral compensation as a sub-agent, right? So now those days are basically gone across all of America. And I'm sorry, Pat, we're not going to provide the PowerPoint on this one at the end of the thing. You asked a very good question, but we will offer the video for you to take a look at. So you'll have the video. If anybody has to drop on this, just know that we send the video out about a week later for all of you to watch. So over time, the concept, since those lawsuits in early 1990s, the concept of buyer agency kind of emerged, allowing real estate agents to represent buyers. So even though the compensation is usually paid by the seller, this gave buyers access to professional advice, which is what the Department of Justice wanted. They wanted the professional advice to the buyer so everybody knew who was representing who. Agency today. So now let's fast forward, right? So what types of agency are there today? What's happening? Most of you know this, right? You've been in business long enough. Today's real estate agency relationships, right, come on down to really pretty clearly seller representation. Hey, I'm representing the seller. I'm a listing agent. I got this property on an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. It's all me. Buyer representation, buyer broker agency, right? I'm representing the buyer in this transaction. Dual agency, one brokerage representing both sides of the deal. Designated or appointed agency, depending on the state you're in, they recognize this a little differently. Designated, like you can have one brokerage represent both the seller and the buyer as long as it's designated, meaning in writing and everybody agrees who's getting represented. Transactional brokerage. This is your facilitator sort of agreement. Like I just facilitate the deal. I don't actually represent anybody. I just facilitate the deal. Probably the lowest level of agency, and many states offer this. Florida is a huge state that offers this transactional kind of brokerage agency. Some of these are going to change as we go forward. That's at least the earliest guess. But let's look at this. What is the current legal climate? This is the crux of what we're going to talk about today. And our industry changes through time. The real estate industry and the education industry changes slowly through time. Remember the day back when some of you have been in the business for a long time, and it was all live in-person classroom, and then came along this thing of online education, and slowly 2 to 4% a year for like 20 years. It slowly migrated to online education, started to have an impact in the business. And then COVID hits, and, live online has this big, surgence. And so there's with big events come big changes. And COVID was one of those big changes for our industry. But in the real estate industry, it's usually lawsuits create the biggest changes. and it's almost immediate. Now I can tell you this: the bomb went off, and the dust is starting to settle, and it's really what's the picture after the dust settles from these giant class action lawsuits, because and it's all based on really a couple things, and it really comes down to commissions. It really comes down to who's paying who and who negotiated for their commission, because by law you can always negotiate your commission. And frankly, you should negotiate your commission. And so the whole question of these lawsuits is really down to who's paying who and who negotiated for that commission. Did they really get what they thought they were getting when they were negotiating? So long-standing participation rule required by listing brokers to offer licensees working with or representing buyers at least $1 in their blanket unilateral offers of compensation in the realtor-owned MLSs. So what this is it's a rule. The Realtors Association, I don't know if you guys know, but over 85% of all MLSs in the country are owned by the associations. National Association Realtors and their relationship with state associations and local associations. So over 85% of all MLSs are owned. So over 500 MLSs are owned by the association. And a part of the rule is this participation rule, requiring the listing broker to offer buyer broker compensation in the listing. That's the part when you go into the MLS and you look in the listing and it says buyer broker compensation. 2.3%, 2.4%, 3%, all that kind of stuff. That's a requirement from the association. Here's the rub. That buyer's agent never negotiated with the seller for that fee. In fact, they probably never even negotiated with the buyer for that fee in many states. There's only 18 states in the country that actually require or actually use a buyer representation agreement that outlines how the buyer's agent is going to get paid. 32 states don't even address it. So in 2019, right, brought the first court filing of real estate commission antitrust lawsuits claiming that NAR and other real estate companies, franchisors, were not transparent with sellers about buyers, about how their commissions were charged and paid. Like, oh, yeah, it's a 7% listing, and I'm going to share, 45% of that with the buyer side, and they'll take care of that, and they'll represent the buyer, and we have to do this, though, because we have to do this, because if you don't put a commission that's, competitive in the MLS, and other agents are going to skip right over it. They're not going to show it. That was the argument made in court, right? How many states use the buyer agency form, Faith? 18 states recognize them. Some require them, but out of that, 18 total recognize them right now. Doesn't mean you can't use it. You can use it. In fact, a part of the solution in the end is going to be that the only way you're going to get paid in the near future as a buyer's agent is if you do have an agreement with your buyer. And so what does that mean? That's a lot of questions. Some people have never asked that question before. Some agents don't even know this is kind of coming in the industry. So the claim was that brokerages conspired to continue to conspire to restrain trade. That's what these entire class action lawsuits were about. And in September of 2023, the defendants settled out of court before starting the trial for one of these big lawsuits, right? One agreed to pay $55 million. Think big national brokerage. Guys, probably all seen this. You can Google this. You can find out who they are. The other one's going to pay $85 million to the plaintiffs. Weeks before the trial began, a little tip of the hat, NAR kind of tipped its hat here, changed its compensation rule, the participation rule that required that the listing broker offer buyer broker agency payment in the MLS, right? They allowed listing brokers to offer buyer's agents zero. Said essentially, you don't have to offer anymore. All right. So on October 16th, 2023, the first commission lawsuit, big one, went to jury. And does anybody know what happened? I think everybody knows what happens. Yeah, 2.5 hours of deliberation, and it was over. Defendants were found guilty, which included NAR, monetary damages of $1.78 billion, which triple in this case. And it could be as much as $5.4 billion, which I'm pretty sure everybody knows nobody has the money to pay. So what does that mean? Well, It's not quite that simple. You would think you could pay it or the association's going to appeal it, but other players are getting involved. Once again, remember I said back in the early 1990s, the Department of Justice stepped in and said, hey, people need to know who's representing who. Well, once again, the Department of Justice is stepping in. There's another lawsuit, right, filed in 2020, right? There's one of several large ongoing cases in the state of Massachusetts. Well, in 2023, the judge approved a preliminary settlement. Broker just said, we're going to settle. You got to stop this madness. Let's move on. We're going to change our business. We're going to move on. Well, in a statement of interest filed on February 15th of 2024 by the Department of Justice, it savages. It's not my words. This is the article actually savages the proposed MLS providers settlement. So the MLS was sued. I think I said brokerages earlier. I'm sorry. This was an MLS that was sued directly, not brokerages. MLS and provider settlement, and calls out the MLS for limiting competition. In a statement of interest, the DOJ provided some suggestions of what would be in the settlement with the plaintiffs who are the homeowners and theirs. One proposal was that, hey, let's have an injunction that would prohibit sellers from making commission offers to buyers, brokers at all. Listen, a broker goes in and lists a home and says, hey, we're going to pay the buyers and we're going to put that in. The DOJ says, no, you can't put buyer broker compensation in the MLS anymore. We don't want that because the seller is paying a buyer broker who never negotiated for the commission. You can't do that. The DOJ says absolutely separation of church and state. Everybody has to negotiate their commissions separately so that they have to demonstrate their value in the marketplace. That injunction would promote competition by empowering buyers to negotiate directly with their brokers. So what does that mean? Put your forward thinking cap on and you say, what happens right now in the industry when I'm a buyer agent? Well, I guess somebody who's interested in looking at homes. Well, great. Come on in. You know what? I can do that for you. I can set up appointments and I can set up a search for you and we can go look at homes. And this is going to be awesome. I'm going to show you a bunch of homes. We're going to negotiate a great offer. We're going to get it closed and you're going to own a home. And the buyer says, that's fantastic. How much is that going to cost me? And right now, the buyer's agent says, well, actually, it's built into the price of the house. The seller's already paying the commission. You don't have to worry about it. I mean, and I know I'm a licensed agent. I've said that before. And I've said, it's okay. It's all covered. And that's part of the problem with this whole lawsuit. They're like, nah, you need to negotiate with that buyer for your services. And so what does that mean? This means the DOJ says you're going to be, if you're a buyer's agent, negotiating with your buyer those fees. Most of America doesn't do that right now. That's going to have to change. I mean, that's the idea behind everything here. In fact, you're going to have to not only change how you're negotiating, you have to change how you demonstrate your value. Because the first thing the buyer says, I'm going to pay you 2.4% of it. That's $20,000. What am I paying you $20,000 for? What are you doing? How are you earning this money? We looked at 6 homes and how does that work? How are these agents going to demonstrate that value to those buyers? It's going to be a big question going forward. How are you going to demonstrate your value proposition? How are you going to compete in the marketplace? What are your fees going to be? Is it actually going to lower the fees ultimately? Because that's essentially what the lawsuit said, is that sellers and have overpaid, that commissions were too high. Now, I've had some people argue with me already and say, listen, I actually think commissions on the buyer side are going to go up because of this. And it's going to go up because right now I got an agent who's maybe got 20 years in the industry, who's the industry expert in that area, and they don't get to negotiate their commission. Their commission is negotiated by somebody listing the house right now. But given the opportunity to negotiate their listing, who says they're going to stop at 2.4, 2.7, 3%, 3.3, 4%? You know what? I want 5% to find you the right home and negotiate the right price. Maybe it goes the other way. Don't know. Time will tell. But there's interesting things that are going to happen on the buyer side of the deal, right? So what will those future changes be? More listing brokers offer zero, first off, in the MLS, especially those doing the settlements. those big brokerages doing settlements, some of their settlements are going to require that they can't offer the buyer broker commission in the MLSs. Right? I could put in here, see the DOJ, right? The DOJ says we don't want that. Well, will MLSs be denied the right to offer compensation to buyer broker by the listing agent? Huh? What do you think the DOJ is going to do? Will buyers have to ask the seller directly in the purchase agreement for the buyer broker compensation? So in other words, think about this. I'm a buyer's agent, and the buyer and I negotiate a deal, and I say, yes, I'm going to get paid. My professional fee is going to be 2.5% of the sale price. And the buyer says, well, okay, now how do I pay you that? Well, we can finance it. Not sure you can. There are limitations on how much a mortgage lender is going to finance the buyer broker commissions on a deal. In fact, we're going to get the seller to contribute in the deal. Well, seller contributions have limits also, right? Under $10,000, the seller can only contribute up to 3% of closing costs. You know, 10,000 to 25,000, it's 6%. And over 25,000 contribution, they can only do 9%. And so there's limitations on where's that money going to come from, which is another reason why some people think the buyer's side of the deals commissions are going to shrink. But the good news is, and where's Lynn? Lynn, you've been in the business for so long, right? Do you remember back in the late 80s, in the early 70s, well, like you said earlier on, what happens is the buyer says, hey, seller, I want to buy your home. And you know what, seller? I need you to pay my buyer broker as a part of this deal directly. And you write it right into the deal. I remember writing commissions into the deal. But look at Johnny brings up a point. VA doesn't allow the buyer to even pay the commission. So yeah, you're going to have the seller pay. How do you do that? How do you do it legally? How do you secure your fee? How do you have a buyer agency representation agreement when your state doesn't even recognize that yet? A lot of this is going to have to work out, right? How will this work for the buyer attorneys? They'll be busy for a while, probably. But the good news is some of this stuff is so old it's new. We used to do stuff like this. This was how it was identified before, is that we would ask for the seller to pay the commission as a part of the purchase agreement, which is negotiated, right? That's totally legal. Everywhere that's legal if it's done right. So it's not that somebody's not going to pay the commission, but what does that mean on the listing side of the deal? When I go in and list a home and now I don't list it for this, 6%, 7%, 5%, I list it for 3%, 2%, 4%, whatever it is. If I'm listing it lower, am I going to need to train my seller that, hey, listen, a buyer's probably going to ask you to pay this. So we're going to have to work this into as an expected expense. There's pieces that are going to come together very quickly this year, right? Man, look at Lynn. You even had side agreements. Oh my gosh. I've seen it all, Lynn. I'm with you. All right. So the key here is, will some compensation come from the seller and the buyer? Yeah, it could be. It could be part of it's coming from the buyer, part of it's from the seller. How are you going to do that? These are the big questions that are out there. One thing is abundantly clear, though. Those who have a buyer representation compensation contract are the ones who will get paid. You will no longer expect the seller to pay your commission if you're representing the buyer. That will go away. That's my belief. That's my opinion, and that's a lot of other experts' opinions. And if the DOJ has anything to say, which they almost always do, that's their belief too. So change is coming for brokerages, agents, MLSs, and associations. They're all on it. They're trying to be. They're behind it a little bit, right? So organizations around the country are now looking to implementing and refining their buyer broker processes, right? Transparency concerning compensation for real estate services will be the focus, whether it's consumers, licensees, or broker companies. Super important. That doesn't mean it's restricted, right? So, what did I do here? Yeah, here we go. What we do know is that listing brokers, especially buyer brokers, will be doing things differently in the future. A unilateral offer of compensation will no longer be required, is no longer required by NAR. So that participation rule, that's already gone. You don't have to put in a buyer broker compensation in the MLS, at least in the MLSs owned by the associations, right? That doesn't mean it's restricted, or at least for now, to offer compensation to the buyer broker. You can still offer it. You can still offer it. It just means it's no longer required as a condition of the MLS. That's a big change. What happens as brokerages decide not to put the compensation in as a part of the listing, and it doesn't go into the MLS, and buyers show up thinking it's the days of old, where they're gonna, hey, I'm gonna show you a bunch of homes, we're gonna negotiate a great deal, and don't worry about it, seller's gonna pay. And all of a sudden they open up the MLS and it's a zero compensation in the MLS, and they haven't had that conversation with the buyer. That's trouble. That's trouble. So buyers agents will have to learn to set expectations better. And this is the big kind of payoff for here. They're going to have to go to work, right? The days of when, a new agent, brand new in the business, right, been in the business for 6 weeks, can get paid the same commission as somebody who's probably been in the business for 10 years, 3 years, 5 years, right, that can demonstrate a value to a buyer. Before, when it was negotiated as part of the listing, it didn't matter who sold the home, they all got paid the same thing. About time you went to work. I like it. So, but the deal is, now you're going to have to actually demonstrate that value. How do you do it? What services are you providing? How do you get paid? How do I know when you've done a good job, right? They must communicate and articulate their value propositions, right, to home buyers. And they're going to need to compete. Clear offers of unilateral compensation are not required in the MLS anymore. They're not required. They're going to start going away. They have to educate themselves, right? This is a part where maybe you're coming in, right? Commissions are always negotiable. You have to remember that, right? So I got a poll question for you guys right now. And this is a part of, this whole webinar is about information, just sharing what we know. Big organization, Kaplan, I have to be on top of this. We have to be in front of it as much as possible, understanding where the market's going. So sharing this with you. So I'm asking you, do any of you offer buyer representation education training at your school? I'm going to ask a poll question really quick. Where's my poll question? Hang on. Not sure what happened. Okay, I'll go over here. Here comes the next poll question, everybody. Does your school currently offer buyer representation education and training? Do you offer it right now? Do you know? I mean, I think our Dearborn, RE campus, we have a buyer representation course, a 6-hour course. It's a fine course on buyer representation. What are the fiduciary responsibilities? How's required? Very, very straightforward course that's kind of stood the test of time. It's updated regularly. Very solid course about buyer representation. Look at this. Okay, so we got them all in. I got 3. I'm going to go 2 more seconds, 1 second on the poll, and I'll share the poll and finish. Here we go. Share the results. 56% of you say you're offering something. Good for you. People are going to need to know. They're going to need to understand what is going on in the world, right? Is your cost only online? It is. It is only online, Faith. If you want to get the course, like I said, Chris Robinson's on here, national account director. Send him a chat, and or just put a yes in the thing here. He can look to try to get you set up with RE Campus or get you set up with because there is one more thing that I will share with you in just a little bit. So look at that. 38% of you say no, and that's okay. You don't have to have all the solutions for everybody, but you might. This change is going to be, I think, pretty big in the industry. And not sure, you got 7% of you. All right, so let's stop sharing. Here's what we currently have available that I know of. RE Campus Buyer Representation in Real Estate. It's a 6-hour online course that's available. You can put that up and get it up, and people will have a basic foundation of buyer representation. It's a pretty solid course. There's also kind of next level courses, and I'm just putting it out there because I want you guys to understand it's there. But the National Association of Realtors has an accredited buyer representative designation, ABR. And some of you may have seen that like a week ago, they put out free ABR to members in good standing at the National Association of Realtors, right? So, and that's a 12-hour designation course. Goes through all the buyer representation. It's been around for longer than a decade, maybe even decades, the ABR course. And we'd like to hear from you. So if you have any other topics that you want to have covered, feel free to contact us at dearborn.com, salesops@dearborn.com if you have any other questions for the sales team. And once again, thank you all for attending. Appreciate your time. Hopefully you're all a little bit smarter on where things stand within the industry when it comes to buyer agency representation. Thank you.